makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Israel's defense minister says he's instructed the IDF to respond forcefully to Iran after it said it had identified missile launches from the Islamic Republic. Now, this comes just hours after Benjamin Netanyahu said he had agreed a ceasefire with Iran after President Trump announced in the truce earlier this morning. Now, the fragile truce came after an extraordinary night in which Tehran retaliated against a U.S. attack over the weekend by launching missiles at an American airbase in Qatar. Now, the Islamic Republic's move was telegraphed, with Qatar and the U.S. being forewarned. Now, for more, let's bring in Dan Williams from Jerusalem and Jumana Bersetchi from Dubai. So thank you both for joining us. Dan, the IDF says it's identified missile launches from Iran. Has a ceasefire failed?
Well, it doesn't seem touch and go. We have had ceasefires in the Middle East involving Israel, where, should we say, the immediate period after they were declared was a ceasefire stabilization period. This is what is referred to in retrospect with the occasional violation. The stakes here are very, very high, not least as the United States, President Trump is a major stakeholder. In fact, he's the sponsor and potentially the guarantor of this ceasefire. So we'll have to understand what happened just then with what Israel describes as an Iranian missile salvo toward the north of Israel. No reports of casualties or damage from there, but Israel is certainly braced to respond. I'm not aware yet of that retaliation having been carried out. The question is whether both sides will draw a line under this episode, pursue a ceasefire that's only a few hours old, or whether everything will spiral out of control. Yeah. So what we have is there are images there from the south where 4 Israelis were killed, or 4 people, apparently civilians, killed this morning in the final hours before the truce was called at 7 a.m. This is something that will scald many Israelis, however relieved they might feel, at the end of this extraordinary 12 days of unprecedented fighting with Iran. The Iranians will certainly declare this a victory. The Israelis have also declared it a victory of a sort. So both sides will be domestically looking to shore up their positions. I think questions that will be asked of Prime Minister Netanyahu domestically is, despite his government's achievements against Iran, which really do appear quite dramatic in terms of cutting down the Iranian nuclear program, cutting down the missile program.
Dan, let's also get to Jumana Bersetchi. So, Jumana, how is the fragile truce being actually received across the region?
I mean, it's been a real whirlwind the last 24 hours, Francine, the highs and the lows. But what I can tell you is we have 2 official statements coming through in the last half hour, both from Egypt and from Saudi Arabia, welcoming the truce and crediting President Trump for getting it across the line. Nothing yet from Qatar, though incidentally, there is a press conference being held with the Lebanese Prime Minister around this time, so we expect to hear from Qatar shortly afterwards. But bottom line is, I think most of the region, and obviously it depends on how lasting this ceasefire is going to be, but most of the region seems to be breathing a sigh of relief this morning because of, number one, the announcement of the ceasefire, and 2, because we really averted the worst case scenario yesterday with that very choreographed, telegraphed attack out of Iran onto the U.S. base in Doha. No fatalities confirmed afterwards. In fact, President Trump thanked Iran for giving them the heads up before they launched that attack, which really removed the possibility of the rest of the region being pulled into this conflict. And so you look at the regional bourses today, they're all up anything from 1.5% to 2%. So as of now, the region seems to be feeling a lot better about the prospects for stability. But again, the big question is, how lasting is this truce really going to be?
Jumana, thanks so much. Jumana Bersetchi there in Dubai, Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Now, European stocks in the green today following the tentative Israel-Iran truce. For a look at markets, we're joined by Mislav, Matejka, head of global and European equity strategy at JPMorgan. Thank you for joining us. I mean, it's a busy week. It's actually, 2 weeks that these markets have been on tenterhooks to try and understand the geopolitics that goes with the instability in the Middle East. What are markets pricing in today?
Okay, so I would say geopolitics obviously matters a lot short term, but historically, if you look at typically that kind of fades, and typically the markets use this as a buying opportunity, and obviously oil price is the key, and the fall in the oil price is very welcome. But I think we're going to go back to the bigger picture, and that is really to talk about the tariffs and the growth for the second half of the year, and the markets have had a very strong V-shaped rebound, so there is a lot priced in.
But Mislav, I mean, I guess the concern with the tariffs is that we also don't know where we end up, right? There's a big announcement, then there's a postponement, there's renegotiation. So how do you do to look at equities to just model what the economy is doing? What's your base for tariffs and trade?
Okay, so wherever we end up, we are going to end up way, way higher than most thought at the start of the year. And this is the key punchline that if you look at 2018, the whole sum product of the trade war was 1.5% increase in the effective tariff rate. And right now we are moving from, let's say, 2 and a bit at the start of the year to current 13, 14%, and that could be even higher with Section 232. So to believe that tariffs are fully digested and that inflation pickup will not happen whatsoever, I think that's basically premature.
So when do you decide actually on again, the longer-term impact of these tariffs and therefore what it means for your wheelhouse equities?
I would say the inflation has to pick up in the U.S. and there's a bit of a bifurcation because you have the global inflation picture, which is quite different. You have the U.S. where there's going to be a pickup, and you have Europe with a stronger euro is going to be weaker still. China is still in a disinflation. And ultimately what that brings is maybe further dollar weakness, and that brings you to a lot of trades that you should do in the second half of the year, the rotation trades regionally.
So, Mislav, I mean, does that mean that it's basically divergence, right? If you see, and we started seeing also with Bank of Japan and others, but if you see an ECB diverging to the Fed, are there opportunities just by playing it that way?
I think so. I think so. If you take a big step back, all the feedback we get from loads of clients is, look, everybody's telling us to be bearish on the dollar. Everybody's telling us that you should be moving out of the U.S. into international, and that is so consensus. But, you know, the point here is we had 15 years of just one-way trade. The U.S. was very strong. Everybody else was underperforming. So to say that that trade has fully played out, I think it's very, very early.
But, Mislav, I mean, the $1 million trillion question is why we have bad surveys in the U.S. and it's actually not translating into the real economy. We're not seeing it for inflation. We're not seeing it in some of the data points. So does inflation suddenly pick up? And with it, is it companies going bust? Or what are the second and third round effects of such a situation?
Okay, so the first point here is we are not looking for a recession. We think that recession will be skirted, but the risks are somewhat higher because the soft data has been very soft and hard data is so far staying resilient. But as you go into the second half, you will see a clear pickup, in our view, in inflation of 1 or 2%, which will squeeze real disposable income and purchasing power. And on the other hand, the question will also be, what does the Fed do? Because they're coming under pressure a lot. So ultimately, the release valve here is the further dollar weakness.
Mislav, but the further dollar weakness also has an impact for emerging market equities. Again, how if you had to construct your ideal portfolio, where would you be looking right now?
I think you should be looking at emerging markets. So we can be bearish for a very long time on emerging markets. Just a few weeks ago, we upgraded to overweight. Emerging markets have done badly for years as the U.S. has been very strong. And now you have some dollar weakness. Emerging market bonds are doing quite well. You have the U.S. and China trade uncertainty, which has basically peaked. And the valuations, you're not buying something on 23 times with hope that the earnings are delivered. You're buying something on 11, 12 times when people are not there.
What do you do with Europe? Again, I know there's a defense play. We have the NATO meeting today where I imagine the Secretary General will do everything they can not to have a second Spain where they don't agree to the 5%. Is it too much price perfection, a lot of the defense stocks?
We are still bullish on the defense. We think on a 1 to 2 year view, they are remaining a structural buy, but multiples are very high. They have done very, very well. There is a bit of a travel and arrive here, but it depends on your time horizon. Technically, short term, maybe Europe consolidates, but longer term, it has more positives than before.
Mislav, I have a viewer question, love a viewer question. Thank you to all of the viewers that watch us at home or in the office and then send questions. So this person's writing in saying, do you modulate your strategy depending on the EU tariff? So where's the pain threshold for EU equities?
So this is the part of this short-term tactical that if you look at, let's say, China and the U.S., the negotiations are much more advanced. And with Europe, they are just starting. And there is a risk that the U.S. tries to be harder with Europe, tries to make the example of Europe. And Europe is ultimately a global cycle exporters play. And that's the issue that after the very strong rally in Q1, for Europe, you have some of this consolidation and maybe doesn't outperform near term. But ultimately, once the tariffs picture is a bit more clear, then you want to be more positive again.
And overall for equities, I mean, we had, earnings have been okay. Are they going to be much more squeezed going forward, especially if you see a pickup in inflation in the U.S.?
Well, that's what we need to see, because basically either the companies try to pass it on and then consumer rebels, or companies internalize it and squeezes the profit margins. So the bottom line is we had a very, very aggressive move up in the tariff rates. That's not going to go away, and you still need to see the ultimate fundamental impact.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you saw some of the European domestic shares outperforming. I mean, is that from a very low base?
Yes. So if you look at,
it's not. I mean, that's the kind of the gold as late as It's just a thing. It happens if you're from a low base, so you have much more to run.
Yes, and there is a big change. There is a German fiscal stimulus, which is going to be very material, and as we move towards 2026, it's going to start to bite. So we want to be long domestic, short exporters in Europe, partly because we do think the dollar will have a next leg down, and European fundamentals will be looking better as we move into the end of the year.
Mislav, what do you do with the UK? Do you put the UK a little bit to the side?
UK is very cheap as well. It's typically a defensive market, so let's say if you go back to volatility or if there's uncertainty increasing, then UK has its space, but really the story is largely about Eurozone, because that's where there is a big shift.
Mislav, just going back, because I know we need to go, but when you look at oil and the fact that there were projections of oil going to $100 a barrel, especially if the Middle East got much worse or certainly didn't temper back. On a day like today, do you worry about oil, or do you just put it as a problem for next week?
The fundamental story for oil was there's much more supply because of the Saudi. The demand could be a bit weaker in the second half if the U.S. takes a bit of a hit. So fundamentally, the oil price should not be up. And what's happening in the last 24 hours probably helps here. So I think unless the oil moves to $90, $100, I don't think that's going to be the primary driver of the market.
Mislav, thank you so much for joining us. Mislav Matejka there, head of global and European equity strategy at JPMorgan. Now, coming up, we're in conversation with Lithuania's foreign minister as NATO leaders meet in The Hague. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
What I heard so far at every meeting that I had with my American colleague, or any plenary meetings with a larger group of countries, whether it's Secretary Rubio or Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, they all say that they are committed to NATO, that NATO is more relevant than ever, and that Article 5 remains a fundamental pillar to our transatlantic security. I think that's the foundation, and that remains solid. Of course, we need to keep discussing with the United States what military assets, how many troops they want to have in Europe. It could be that some of those resources will be shifted. I think that's quite likely that that's going to happen. But if we can do this in coordination, and if that happens gradually, and if the foundation still remains here in Europe, I think that's something that we can overcome. If we agree to 5% spending on core defense and on defense-related matters, I think that would be an historic step. If you go 1 year back to the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., what we agreed upon is that the 2% is not a target, but it's a floor. So we are now 1 year later, and if we now move from 2% to 5%, with of course a 3.5% and a 1.5%, I think that would be an historic step, especially if 32 allies in unity agree on this. I think the rules are the same to everyone. I also think that Spain will sign the declaration on Wednesday, when the NATO summit comes to an end. Of course, the reality is that countries have flexibility in the way that they implement these agreements. And that has been true in the past as well. In 2014, we agreed on the 2%, and many countries only this year reached the 2% or still have difficulty reaching it. So there is some flexibility in the rules that NATO sets, and it's both on the financial side but also on the military side. But I think in the end, what it comes down to is that we all agree on the same percentage, that we do have military plans that were already agreed upon 2 weeks ago, and in which every country said, I'm willing to do my fair share. And I think that that's key, and that's as relevant for Spain as it is for any other country.
The defense minister of the Netherlands there on the U.S.'s push to have NATO members spend 5% of the GDP on defense. Now, for the latest on the NATO summit, we're joined by Ollie Crook, who's in The Hague with a special guest. Hi, Ollie.
That's right, Francine. We're in The Hague here for the leaders' meeting of NATO that is assembling here over the next couple of hours. Donald Trump expected to arrive a little later this evening. And really the monumental announcement coming out of the group of leaders will be that NATO will commit to a 5% GDP spend. This has been a very long road to get here, and we are finally here. And we're very pleased to be joined by a guest now, the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Kęstutis Budrys. Thank you so much for your time today. I'd like to just get there's been a little bit of debate about whether or not you're going to get to 5% agreement across the board, Spain potentially a hang-up. Do you think that you get the full commitment from NATO allies to the 5% GDP spend?
So we will see tomorrow when leaders will gather to the meeting. But as for now, yes, we see this commitment, and it will also be underlined in a joint statement that will be released tomorrow. It was a hard path to there. There were a lot of skeptic voices then. I remember when Lithuania was the first NATO country to announce that we will reach 5% in 2026, and we did it last year, December. So there was a lot of skepticism. What you are doing here, and why 5%, and whether we are trying to please someone. But now we see that it is the new standard for NATO. I'm really happy about it.
And so the volume of money is one question. The other question is the timeline. 2035 is the deadline to reach that target. Is that too late?
That is too far to the right. We have to squeeze the time to the left. And of course, the different countries will go with different dynamics. And for Lithuania, next year will be above 5%. Our ambition is to be number one next year among the NATO countries with our defense spending. And I hope that others will also join this match. Who will be the first one with expenditure? My concern is that when we're talking about the 10 years timeline, and especially knowing how the politics work and how politicians think, I'm concerned that some of us would like to postpone everything and to push forward. So that would be the task for all of us and for NATO to keep the discipline on it. We have to start spending tomorrow.
And Lithuania is obviously much more acutely aware of the threat that Russia poses. What year would you think is a reasonable target for NATO across the board to get to that target of 5%?
We should talk about the NATO capability targets when we are ready to reach it.
Sure.
For Lithuania, for us, deadline is 2030. That's why we made a decision to increase our defense spending.
Sure.
For 2030, we want to have the strong, war-capable division in our land forces. And this is how the planning should be organized also across the NATO. Capability targets, deadline, and then the spending. So for all of us, it's sooner than later. Because the example to which we have to compare ourselves, how we are doing, that's Russia. And in Russia, they're intensifying the tempo for the defense industry production, for mobilizing the personnel into the armed forces. Therefore, we have to speed up.
And we expect Donald Trump, really the backbone of the NATO alliance, to arrive here a little bit later today and obviously attend the summit tomorrow. What does success look like here as it regards to Donald Trump? What do you want to hear from the American president?
I want to hear that it's really paramount and important for NATO, that transatlantic bond is strong, that NATO is the strongest alliance as it was yesterday, it will be tomorrow, that we are ready to commit more, and we are here to announce that we are the most strongest and the most lethal power on the globe. And this is what all NATO is about. And that would be the success formula for the deterrence and to avoid the wars in the future. And that would be the peace formula for the decades to come.
And another thing that hangs over this summit is the Americans basically assigning their geographic military posture. There's going to be a lot of questions about the U.S. withdrawing many of its forces that are within the European space, about 84,000 of them, 1,000 of which are in Lithuania. Do you expect the United States to draw down its military presence within Europe over the next few months and years?
We know that there is a review of American posture across the globe and also in Europe, but we have no indications as for this morning that there would be reduction of forces on the front line. Where they are stationed right now on the front line in the Baltics and down in Poland and down to the south, that's the best place for them to be because they create the effect in scales for what we are spending there. So we are providing the best host nation support This is the absolutely high end of military infrastructure that is there, and this is the effects already given in the form of deterrence. So this is what has to be continued.
And then the other sort of aid package, the Biden aid package, is expected to run out in terms of its volume to be supportive of Ukraine. We do not expect Donald Trump to add any more to it for the Ukrainians. What comes next for Ukraine? Do we now, at the European level, need to think more seriously about touching those Russian frozen assets?
We had to do it already,
yeah.
And this is good that we still keep them, and that now we have to move to the phase 2 and to seize them and to use them for the purposes of Ukraine. We are convinced in that, and Lithuania prepared not one non-paper, circulated it with the ways how to do it. So we have the answers already what concerns legal issues about it, and the answer is yes, it is doable and in line and in compliance with the international law. Second thing is political and financial risks, and we are ready to share the risks and to manage it together. So yes, we shouldn't leave it to one of the countries of our allies, and we have to go together and do it.
And seeing what's happened over the last 48 hours, the bombing of Iran, one of the great sort of allies of Russia, do you think that this leaves Russia weaker?
I think that it pushes all the allies and partners of Russia to rethink the partnership in the future. Because what is true for now that Syria, Assad, the good ally of Putin, and he was left there in the trouble. Now we see what the defense partnership with Russia means for Iran. It means that Russia won't step in. So it means that it weakens all the alliances across the globe, and also it weakens the very axis of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. And for us, why it is extremely important, because Iran is enabling Russia in its operations and an aggression against Ukraine with drones, with ballistic missiles, and with the other assets. So weaker this axis is, safer Europe is.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for your time here, speaking on the sidelines of the NATO summit here in The Hague. The Lithuanian foreign minister hoping for a more muscular and still very supportive by Donald Trump NATO alliance here.
Thank you so much, Ollie Crook there, speaking, of course, about defense and NATO. And in the last few minutes, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said the U.S. is committed to NATO, but he expects equalized spending. Now, this is a big story after Spain a couple of days ago said they will not reach that 5%. The other big story, and this is in the last couple of minutes, a lot of questions on what happens between Iran and Israel after we thought there was a ceasefire. Iran, a short time ago, denying firing missiles at Israel after the ceasefire. This is according to the state-run Islamic Republic of Iran broadcasting. Again, earlier, Israel's defense minister said he had instructed the IDF to respond forcefully to Iran after it said it had identified missile launches from the Islamic Republic. This comes just hours after the Prime Minister of Israel said he had agreed a ceasefire with Iran after President Trump announced a truce earlier this morning. Coming up, we continue talking about geopolitics. We'll get, of course, an expert view and analysis on the situation. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Hours after ceasefire declaration in the Middle East, Israel says it has identified missile launch from Iran and will respond forcefully, while Tehran denies the claims. Oil trims losses after Israel vowed to retaliate for an Iranian missile strike, plus Donald Trump heads to NATO, with the UK pledging to ramp up defense spending to 5% of GDP. Now, let's just recap some of our top stories. And Iran has denied firing missiles at Israel after the ceasefire. Now, the state-run Islamic Republic of Iran broadcasting. Earlier, Israel's defense minister says he's instructed the IDF to respond forcefully to Iran after it said it had identified missile launches from the Islamic Republic. Now, this comes just hours after Benjamin Netanyahu said he had agreed a ceasefire with Iran after President Trump announced the truce earlier this morning. So again, the situation seems very, very fluid. For more analysis, we're joined by Ali Ansari, history professor at the University of St. Andrews. Professor Ansari, thank you for joining us. I mean, it's a bit of a she said, he said. There's a missile, Iran saying it's not them. What do you think has happened so far? Is there a truce or unclear?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's very unclear. You sort of wake up to one news, and then within an hour it changes. It may well be that there's been some failure of command and control in Iran. Someone mentioned that they may have people may have mistimed it. They may have misunderstood the timing of the ceasefire. Presumably, whether a launch has happened from Iran or not could be verified elsewhere. So, we could tell, and I can't see why the Israelis would be necessarily lying about this. I mean, it must be able to be verified from elsewhere. So something has clearly gone wrong.
Yeah, could I, Professor, also just get your take? I mean, was this a deliberate ploy from Israel once the attack started to get the U.S. involved? And actually, having a U.S. involvement, what does it mean for their strategy in the Middle East longer term?
What, you mean the attacks that the Americans conducted over the weekend?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always going to be likely that Trump was going to get involved, particularly in terms of dealing with Fordo. But it seems to be that Trump obviously wants to minimize American involvement. He obviously has pressures at home and he doesn't want to extend it. So he's been very quick to try and close this down. Whether that will happen or not is another matter. But, we clearly have to wait and see what this supposed missile strike is all about. And if the Iranians have infringed the ceasefire, I mean, their rhetoric at the moment is not terribly helpful in some cases. So we need to see what is actually happening.
Okay, even if there is a ceasefire, and maybe, we need to see over the next couple of hours exactly how it develops. But if there is a ceasefire, do you think the ceasefire holds?
Well, at the moment, it isn't. I mean, that's
well, at the moment, we don't know, right?
I mean, at the moment, if this is true, then it's not going to hold. I mean, if it may well be that this may be a mistake on the Iranian part, and that they may sort of try and renew the ceasefire for, 12 hours ahead. I mean, they might try to restate it. I mean, I would suspect that's what will happen. I can't imagine really that the Iranians want to continue this. I mean, I can't imagine that anyone really wants to continue this. I'm sort of inclined to feel that some sort of ceasefire, some sort of off-ramp will be secured.
Is a diplomatic route now still open after the last 5 days?
I think ultimately there will have to be a diplomatic solution of one sort or another. What's happened over the last 2 weeks is that the facts on the ground have changed. I mean, that's basically what it is, and I think what people will have to assess is to what extent those facts have changed, to what extent the Israelis and the Americans have been able to damage the nuclear program, and what this means, and how the Iranians basically the regime, I should say, assesses that, and whether they think they can sort of snatch some sort of victory out of the jaws of defeat, if you will. It really depends on what the material damage has been, but also what the moral damage has been on Iran. I mean, it's obviously been a bit of a shock to the system, and they clearly did not want the Americans involved. And bringing the Americans in, I think, might have been the trigger for getting this ceasefire in place.
Right. I mean, when do we know the state of Iran's uranium stockpile and, actually the state of the nuclear program?
Well, I mean, that's for others to assess. I mean, really, it's not something that, we can do. It will have to be, obviously, the intelligence agencies, and perhaps if the IEA can get back in and check to see what's going on. The problem here is that the Iranians have already said, unfortunately, even before the attacks, that they have yet another secret location where they're enriching uranium, and we don't know about that. So we need to see, whether that is actually true, and if it's true, then the Iranians will obviously have to be transparent about it. I mean, it's a very difficult time because they obviously have very little incentive to be transparent about these things at the moment. But on the other hand, the situation is pretty dire. I think however much they will try and claim this to be a victory of sorts, they're not in a good situation.
But Professor, overall, I mean, Iran had a number of options at its disposal, and they decided to give also the Americans and the Qataris a heads up so that the base was being evacuated. How weak is Iran right now? What does that tell us about their state of mind?
Well, I mean, if this latest missile strike is anything to go by, then their command and control is in a pretty poor way. I mean, it has to be said, if this missile strike is at all realistic and it is happening, then they've lost control internally of their command and control. I think they are in a pretty weak way. They've been severely damaged. I mean, the fact that Foreign Minister Araghchi basically had to get clearance from Israel before he could travel to Geneva for those talks is a sad reflection really on their situation. They will obviously argue and spin that having survived this onslaught, and it's the survival that matters, that they have somehow emerged stronger. But I think internally there are some very, very serious questions to be asked. And I think there are some very, very serious divisions. But a lot of this, is very difficult to tell through what we might call a fog of war. I mean, you have to be, we can only really speculate at this stage.
But, Professor, I mean, is it very difficult for the U.S. now to lecture, for example, even Russia on what they're doing in Ukraine if they come in and strike Iran that way?
Well, I think these things will always be quite difficult. I mean, I've always been fairly cynical about international law myself. People tend to use it very selectively. And, we also have to be very frank about it. The Islamic Republic of Iran hasn't really been a staunch defender of international law either. I mean, most countries tend to sort of use it when it suits them. I think it's something obviously we all have to aspire and aim for, but I think using it as a sort of a reference point and basically decreeing something to be against or for international or whatever, I think it's often a difficult case to make, and it's been many years now, to be honest, that countries have approached international law in a very, very loose manner, to say the least.
We're just getting a couple of viewer questions actually on whether, the last 5 days really weakened the Iranian regime from within. Are, harder core units going rogue, or is there going to be a change of regime?
That's the worry, actually. I mean, that is the worry. The harder core units are going rogue. I mean, that is the worry. I think the Iranian regime has always been very brittle. I mean, it's a pretty ruthless, brutal regime, but it's always been quite brittle. It doesn't have a degree of high popularity. Its management of the political economy is dire. It may get a bounce from this, of course. I mean, it may get a bounce because it will claim that it has defended Iran's interests. But once the dust settles, I suspect people will be asking some very serious questions about the complete lack of civil defense, any sort of support for the local population, the failure of the air defenses. I mean, there was a lot of bluster before we went into this about how effective Iran's armed forces were. And, up to a point, yes, but actually they've been proved to be, fairly weak. I mean, I see there that you're saying Iran claims decisive victory against Israel. I mean, here, the spin machines are going into overdrive, clearly.
Yeah, that's according to the IRIB. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ali Ansari, their history professor at the University of St. Andrews. Now, oil trimming some of its losses after Israel vows to retaliate for an Iranian missile strike, which Tehran has denied. We're joined by Al Nightingale, who leads our coverage of oil markets in Europe. So, Al, thank you for joining us. Is the risk actually of a supply shock over, or is it over for now?
I mean, if you just look at the risk premium in oil, we're back down to where we were on June 12th. So the market has interpreted this as, a significant loss of kind of any kind of risk of supply disruption. But who knows? As the professor was just saying, the fog of war, what happens, who can tell? It was fascinating to hear him talking about how this could have been rogue factions in Iran and a loss of discipline. Well, if that were true, just makes you think, well, what else is possible from a kind of a rogue faction? That's not a mainstream view that I've heard before, but if that were the case, then, things would be a bit different, wouldn't they? I think it's very risky to say that there's no chance of a supply risk, but clearly the market has taken it that way, very, very clearly.
Al, I mean, if the ceasefire holds, and again, a very big if with many question marks, but what's the long-term outlook for oil?
Well, if you look at the curve, the forward curve in oil is very, very interesting. It's basically back to where it was on June the 12th. So that takes you back to a market where we were looking at oversupply, where OPEC is dropping barrels into the market, where more is expected to come. And, yeah, we're looking at an oversupply later this year. Demand is okay, but it's not going to keep up with the amount of supply that's coming in. So, we're just going back to where we were, and that wasn't a great place.
Okay, Al, thank you so much. Al Nightingale there with the very latest on oil. Now, airline shares taking off this morning in the wake of a fragile ceasefire announced between Iran and Israel. Our Benedict Cannamel joins us now to discuss the latest. So, Benny, what's the trajectory for airline stocks given the state of today's ceasefire?
Well, we've really seen them sort of react quite starkly to these ups and downs, and today they are up. We see a company like Air France is up more than 10%, Lufthansa up 6%. So really across the board, a sense of optimism, and this is really a combination of things. Part of it is the lower oil price that we just heard IRIB talk about. So there is a sense here that once oil prices come down, that means the cost for an airline will be lower. Then there's the sense of, if I don't need to fly around these no-fly zones anymore, that cuts back on the detours, that cuts back on flight times, that again cuts the cost. So that's sort of the cost part of the equation. But there's also a sense of probably just relief that people will probably start feeling better again about getting on a plane, flying again, and that's not a small part of the sentiment of that industry, of that business, that people want to feel good about flying, they want to feel positive. We saw the Air India crash 10 days ago. That obviously put a huge damper on the industry. Now this. So anything that helps the industry and gives it a bit of a lift on the sentiment side, that certainly helps, and we're seeing it in the stock.
Which carriers, Benny, have been most affected and why?
Well, in the last couple of hours, really, in the last 12 hours, it was carriers in the region. So it was Qatar Airways, to some degree Emirates, but much less so. So really Qatar was most affected because the Qatari government decided to close down the airspace, and that had a huge knock-on effect on the airline. This is a global carrier with a huge fleet, more than 170 destinations around the world. We're still seeing some of the ripple effect of that today. A lot of aircraft out of position at the airport. On the ground, there are still people trying to get their new flights. We see aircraft that had to turn back. There was one particular flight that flew from Perth to Paris, so from Australia to Europe, and had to turn back halfway. So these are people in the air for 17 hours, only to find themselves back to where they'd started. So if that doesn't make you lose your will to live, I don't know what. So we've seen some of that going on, and this is being cleaned up now as we speak, and the disruptions now are sort of at a minimum, and most flight operations are back to normal in the region.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, Benny. Thanks so much, Benedict Cannamel there with the very latest on airlines and aviation. Coming up, our exclusive interview with the L'Oréal chief executive on the impact of tariffs and the outlook for the beauty market. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, the world's largest cosmetics maker, L'Oréal, says it's built up an inventory of some of the products manufactured in Europe ahead of President Trump's tariff increases. The chief executive, Nicolas Hieronymus, says the company is a net exporter from the United States, as many of its brands are made in the U.S. Well, Hieronymus also expects the beauty market to continue growing, but at a slower pace than last year. In April, L'Oréal reported stronger than expected sales in the first part of the year, led by demand for high-end makeup and perfumes. Well, we spoke exclusively to Hieronymus in a wide-ranging interview.
It's true that we live in a world of unknowns. There's just one thing that I know is that the beauty market continues to grow, albeit at a slower pace than last year. But the market continues to grow around 2%. More here in the UK. I've just spent my week in London. The market's around +4%. So we are in a growing market, and indeed we have to manage uncertainties. And for me, the best way to manage it is to leverage as much as possible the uniqueness of L'Oréal, which is being a multipolar company, being across all price points and all geographies. I would say is the best way to offset some of the turbulences that we're facing.
But are consumers buying differently? So do they change actually to cheaper products, or does it stay the same and buy fewer products?
Well, you have you have all scenarios. The very premium products continue to thrive. The middle market is a bit more challenged, and the two channels or price points that are the most dynamic right now are mass markets and also dermatological beauty, which remains quite dynamic. And in terms of categories, I would say that hair care remains super dynamic, and so is fragrance. The one category that is slower is makeup, so probably right now a bit more natural or subdued makeup, but I know this comes in cycles, so we'll have makeup bounce back probably pretty soon.
How many actually, products have you shipped to the U.S. ahead of the tariffs?
We have shipped mainly luxury goods, because if I look at fragrances, mostly, because if I look at my US business, right now I manufacture in the US around 50% of the units I sell in the US. And by the way, we are a net exporter from the US, because what some people sometimes forget is that we have like 18 US brands, and a brand like Kiehl's is manufactured in the US and exported to China and the rest of Europe. So we're a net exporter from the US, but overall half of our units are manufactured there. You add around 15%, which are Canada and Mexico. So all in all, we have like 30% that comes from Europe. It's mainly fragrances or luxury products, which we have indeed built a little bit of inventory on prior to the tariff increases, and which in the end we don't really know what they're going to end up being.
You've certainly bought also, you've been on an acquisition trail. Medicaid is your latest one. Where do you place it? Is it like high-end luxury or skincare?
It's medicated luxury skincare. It's a great brand, and I've been, I come to this country regularly. I just come out of 3 days visiting my British subsidiary, which is doing phenomenal, by the way, overall. And we had spotted that brand back in 2021. They were in their early days, and we thought they were, aside from success, they had an approach which is very similar to our philosophy, which is science-based, with real efficacy in the formulas, created like L'Oreal by engineers of different nature than L'Oreal. And we saw the great quality of their products, and they've done a fantastic performance in the UK. And we approached them, telling them that what we could do for them is make them global, which is what we do with brand. If you know the story of CeraVe, which is again medicated skincare, but at a more affordable price. We acquired that brand. It was $145 million, and it's now over 2 billion euro, and that's making it global. So I hope we can do the same with Medicaid.
Why do you think the UK market is doing so well?
Well, I think there are several reasons. First of all, there's always been, the UK consumers, the British consumer have always been very much into trends, into fashion, and it's also a younger population than some of the European countries. It's more diverse, and we see that both in terms of hair needs, skin needs. There is a stronger need for performing products. So overall, it's a dynamic market, and we are by far the leader of that market, by the way, but with a share that's slightly under my European average. So I came here to tell the teams that like 18.5 or 18.8 was good, but 20 is the European average, so they still have to work a little bit. But Medicaid will add.
You're one of the biggest companies in Europe. What does Europe now need to do to become more competitive in this global change where things are changing fast and frankly almost for the worse?
Europe has to foster innovation. There's something I cannot resist telling you, is that I had a great moment of pride last week because Fortune magazine ranked us as the most innovative European company amongst all sectors, from tech to software, cars, everything. And for me, that's a fantastic acknowledgement of the work of not only our researchers, but our marketeers, our innovators in general, and it's true to the roots of L'Oreal. And I think we are the demonstration that you can be innovative in Europe. And what we are calling upon to Europe to do more is to help innovation, to be a bit less into regulation, less into creating obstacles, but more into supporting innovation, which is more or less what was written in the Draghi and letter report. And we see, and I've been talking to a number of European leaders, at least there is a will, there is a desire to to be more flexible and to spur innovation in Europe. But it seems to be a bit of a heavy machine to move. So right now we're still waiting for actual concrete results. But the first omnibus that are being launched by EU are kind of a good sign and promising. So I'm a believer in Europe, and I think it's the moment to move.
Well, that was Nicolas Hieronymus, the L'Oréal chief executive, speaking to us exclusively a little bit earlier. Now, Standard Chartered's chief executive, Bill Winters, says he encourages people to take risk if they want to get ahead in their career. Now, reflecting on his leadership at the UK bank over the past 10 years, Winters said he may at times have been too hands-on, but today he was much happier to focus on the more strategic aspects of the business. I also asked him what kind of advice he'd give someone in his team who showed huge potential.
Take risk. Take risk. I mean, by the time they're working for me directly, I mean, any time in the last 10 or 15 years, they've already demonstrated that they're competent, and maybe they've got some subject matter expertise. And at that point, you can play it safe and just wait for the opportunity to climb the greasy pole, or you can do something special. And certainly at my level, you never get ahead if you don't take a risk and do something special, because there's lots of people who are just good. So yeah, take some risk.
Is that difficult for thinkers, or have you seen a pattern on certain people take it easily and some people are just, if not shy, they just don't want to?
Some people have made a whole career out of being solid and competent and predictable, and you really need those people. They're really, really good, but they're probably not the natural leaders of a big organization. And other people learn that they build to the confidence to take some risk, and they take a risk. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work. That's fine. I've taken plenty of risks that haven't worked, plenty. And then you're judging, how did you react to that? I was the vice chairman of JPMorgan once. I had a really big trading loss. I was like 30 years old. A really big trading loss at the time of the first Gulf War. And he really put me through the ringer. I thought I was going to be fired. And at the end of the process, he said, yeah, I'm going to increase your limit. Really? Why? He said, because I never give a big limit to somebody who hasn't had a really bad experience and reacted well to it. And in your case, you were terrified, you were paranoid, but you were also thoughtful, and you had a plan. I buy the plan. I can trust you now. And I didn't know until you'd made that mistake that I could trust you. I said, wow, that was a life-forming experience for me.
Do you do that with your team?
I try to.
Giving them more risk and.
I try to.
Because it builds character.
I think so, and it's a bit of an audition as well.
Well, that interview on leadership with the Standard Chartered chief executive features in a special edition of Bloomberg's Management and Work newsletter, which is being published later today. This is the first edition of many editions featuring leading leaders reflecting on their careers. I'm really looking forward to also taking on this new project. Now, let's recap the latest developments from the Middle East. Israel has accused Iran of breaching a ceasefire announced by U.S. President Donald Trump earlier Tuesday to end the 12-day war. Now, hours after Trump's declaration of a truce, Israel says it detected missile launches. Its defense minister instructed the military to respond forcefully to Iran's violation of the ceasefire with powerful strikes against regime targets in the heart of Tehran. Iran has denied firing missiles at Israel after the ceasefire and has claimed a decisive victory against Israel. That's according to state media. Now, Iran has also said its strike on a U.S. base in Qatar was self-defense, and it says it remains committed to good ties with neighbors. We'll have, of course, plenty more on that. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.